Hey friends, welcome to a new video. If you're new here, my name is Alex, and today I want to talk about sending mails from Spring Boot applications. There are a couple of ways to pull this off. So if you're working in the backend already, you could bring in Timeleaf or another template engine and then render all the HTML in the backend and then just use an SMTP connection to send the email. But this is quite tedious because then you have to manage all the files in your version control system. It makes it harder for the actual product people to manage them. So there's a better way of doing this. And in today's video, I want to show you how you can use Brevo, formerly known as Send in Blue, to drag and drop your HTML templates and then use their API to send them from a Spring Boot application. So with that said, let's code. Okay, just a few more words about Brevo here. So you can see I'm on their website. They consider themselves a CRM, but what they also have is this thingy here, which says transactional email. So we can manage templates and send them out. And the good thing is we can put parameters into these templates and then populate them from our Spring application. So let's go to the dashboard, and I already have an account set up. So the initial account is free, so you can use that to play around. Let's go to transactional, and there's templates. And you can see I already have some here that I played around with, but let's create a new template up here. And let's create a template for onboarding new users. So we call this onboarding user. Subject line is welcome aboard. Preview text is thanks for joining. So we can populate all these fields here. From email is just this one that I use for my company. You can use any email that you want. You usually have to validate it initially, that you own the domain. So from name, I just put in xgr.dev here. I skip the advanced options. We go to the next step. And then there's design. Now I can pick a preset here, but there are nicer ones. So let's go to the template gallery. So you can see, you can really choose from any of the designs. I'm going with something simple like this. And you can see the editor is like, it's a full, what you see is what you get editor. And in my experience in different projects, this makes it much easier to hand off the design of these emails to the people who are best able to do this. And you usually also get the benefit of responsive templates here. So you don't have to deal with making the email look nice on mobile. So I don't want to change the template too much, but I want to show you how we can use parameters. So let's adjust this. So hey, and then this is the syntax, params username. So I always have to do these two curly braces, like you probably know them from other template languages. And then params is always the first thing, and then the actual param is added here, which is username. Let's pretend there's some sort of confirmation link. So click this, click this link to confirm your account, something like that, right? So I can go to link, and this link should come from our backend. So I make sure that this is also populated, and it's called URL, params URL. So that will be sent by the backend. We just insert it. So this is the template. Let's save and quit. And we also have to activate it, otherwise it will not work. Okay, so this is a very simple template. And what we need next in order to send out this template is the template ID. So you go back to email templates and you can see the ID up here. So it says onboarding user has the ID for. And that's going to be important because let's already take a look at the API. When we want to send out a transactional email, again, we're not using an SMTP server or anything like that. It's really just an API call. So this is the call that we're looking for. It's the SMTP email call with the respective payload. So what we add is two, like the receivers of the email. We want to add this in the backend. And we also have to specify the template ID. So let's look it up. There it is. So what I want to do is I add the ID of the template, which is 4. Then I provide the receivers, the people getting the email. And I also provide a map with all these parameters that we just had, the username and the link. So let's jump into the IDE. So you can see, as usual, I'm using the current milestone release because we're going to use the REST client for all the fun. I also prepared the requests here, but we look into them a little bit later. So let's start with modeling a template. because we might end up with multiple templates and all these templates have their individual parameters. On the API level, I can just hand over a map, but that's not really type safe. So I want to make sure that the templates are really types in the system that I could use. So here's what we're going to do. We create an interface that's called Brevo template. And the interface will have two functions. Template, which is an int. So this returns the actual template ID that we're using. And then the parameters. And the parameters that we have to send to the API are just a map. So string is always the key. So key would be username and the actual username, or it would be link and the actual link. So I just add any here because I don't really care what we put into the map. So this is what a Brevo template looks like. And now I want to create specific templates. So let's create the onboarding template for the template in Brevo that we just created, template. So that has two properties. There's a username, that's a string, and it has the link, I called it. Did I call it link or URL? Let's go back to the template, just make sure that I know what I've used here. I think I used link. Yeah, let's go with link. We just try it out. Maybe it doesn't work then. Link is also a string, and we want to make sure that this is a Brevo template. So we have to implement these two functions. So I know the template ID of this one, it's 4. And now we have to provide this map here because this is what we sent over the API. So I can return a map of as a username to username, and then link to link. Actually, I think I named it URL. Let's go with URL. Let's quickly refactor by hand. So let's go with URL. And this is that, right? So I have the onboarding template here now. That's a Brevo template. So I get the ID and the parameters will be just added to a map. So if we now have multiple templates, I can just add them here and they are all type safe because when I use them here, I know exactly the parameters that I should add to this template without messing it up. So let's add the Brevo service. So I just call this Brevo. I make it a service. And this will need a REST client and we don't have one yet. So let's go to the config. So it's Brevo config. I make this a configuration as usual. And then we can return our client, which is the REST client. REST, where is it? Come on, REST client. This is based off a builder REST client builder. I can return simply builder build. This should be builder. So then we have the REST client, but there's more that I want to do. We can add the base URL and let's quickly, we need an API key anyway. So we can see this is the base URL, right? Which is API Brevo.com version 3 SMTP email. That's the endpoint that we need. And we also need an API key. So let's go to SMTP and API. Again, I could also use Brevo with their SMTP settings, but I'm deciding to go for the API key. Generate a new one. I call this Spring Boot Demo and generate an API key here. I copy it. There we have it. Let's go back. Now let's add this to our properties already. I'm going to use YAML. And then we will have a few properties. So there is the key that I just copied. It's this one. Then there's the URL, which was HTTPS API Brevo.com version 3 SMTP email. And I also usually, when I have these services that go out and connect somewhere else, I have a toggle that says whether they are enabled. This serves a couple of purposes. I can disable Brevo during my tests if I want to, or I could provide another URL. For example, if I'm using Wiremock, check the other video up here. So now I have these properties, and now let's quickly also model them in our configuration because we're going to need them. So before we continue with the REST client, there is a configuration properties for Brevo. It's a data class called Brevo properties. So it has the URL, which is a string. It has the key, which is a string. And it tells us whether it's enabled, which is a Boolean. now we should have them, and I also need to enable them. So I go with enable configuration properties, Brevo properties. So now in our builder, I could just say the base URL. Oh, first need to inject the properties. Somehow I always keep forgetting that. Private, well, come on, props, Brevo properties. And the base URL is props URL. So we also need to authenticate, right? We got the API key, and the question is, how is the API key being passed? And up here we can see header. So the API key is specified as a request header. It uses the name API-key or lowercase, and then we add the header, so without anything else. So what we can do is configure, this REST client is only going to be used for Brevo in this example. So I can add a default header and call this API key as per the documentation, and then just add the key. So now the REST client is configured, and I can just use that in our Brevo service without taking care of the URL or the API key. Like, all these concerns are not part of that service. So we go with the REST client. I have to add this, not like this, but like this. So I have it here now. And now we can create the actual request. So let's go with send. And we want to send a Brevo template, that's correct. And I actually want to see if the service is enabled. So what we can do is, let's get the properties in here. Private, well, props, Brevo properties. There they are. And now I could say if props enabled, submit, else log. So if Brevo is not enabled, I will just log the message that should be sent here. I could also make this a little bit more sophisticated. So if we have a mailing service and Brevo is just one implementation, we could just load Brevo conditionally if it's enabled, and otherwise have a logging implementation. That would probably be nicer, then we would end up with more components, but I'm going with this simpler approach here just for the sake of brevity. We need, let me close this, we no longer need it, but we need a logger. So private val log equals logger factory, get logger for this class. So we have a private function send that expects the template. Oh, actually there's more that we need. It's not just a template, but I also want a number of receivers. And that's actually a good point to make this a var args. Receivers string. So that means I can pass up an arbitrary number of receivers in here, and send expects the same thing. So we request the Brevo template. Actually, I wanted to do log first. So template. Then there's the, where is it? The Brevo template. And we also want to have the receivers. Yeah, we can just keep that basic implementation here that is suggested. So we go with template receivers, we pass that. The receivers, I have to destructure here. I have to just do this so they are passed correctly. And now let's also add the function for the actual sending. So that also, let's go with all of that. We don't need that. So, but the receivers, let's check. Private, let's call it submit because we have the same thing already here. I call it submit already. So there's template and then there's receivers. So there we go. If Brevo is enabled, we just submit it, and submit means actually sending it. So now it's time for our client. So this is a post request. We don't need to specify the URI because we have the base URL as part of the client. So, but we don't have a body yet. So how do I get from a template and the receivers to a Brevo request? And I prepared that already because I didn't want to spend the time doing this here now. You can see I have all of that here. And let's quickly check that. I don't want to go into the details. There's a Brevo request when we send something, and it expects the template and the receivers. And then we have the serializer, which just takes that request and then creates the proper JSON for the API. And you can check all of that in the code that I've linked down below. For now, what we can do is post a body, and the body is a Brevo request. That's the thing that I've just shown you. And that needs the template and the receivers to list. And we can just say retrieve to bodiless entity. So I would get back a reply, but I'm not interested in that for now. Okay, so now this is the function that actually submits something to Brevo. So since we have Brevo enabled, let's check the config again. So it's enabled, we have the API key in here. So let's actually go and send an email. So fun run. We start with a command line runner here. Let's just execute it when the application starts. This one needs access to Brevo. I need to import the bean. And now we go Brevo, send. And then it's the onboarding template. And we specify the username. That's Alex. Then we have to specify that link. As you recall, that's https xgr.dev. And the receivers. And the receivers is a varargs, so I just specify hello at xgr.dev. And now let's kick off the application. Coffee time. So we can see the application has started. Nothing else is going on. So quickly, let's go check my emails. So there's nothing here yet. And there's the email. So we go in there. And we can see the parameters have been populated successfully. So it says, hey Alex, which is correct. And now let's click the link. And we can see it resolves to my website. So that's how you can use Brevo to send template emails. Again, it's super easy with that setup to add new emails to the code and to Brevo itself, and then just go and send them out. As usual, I hope that was useful. Let me know if you have questions down in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.